What's up, guys? It's CG Kid. So recently I had the opportunity to fly out to California to visit facilities operated by Renewal Health Group, and I got to interview the staff for this channel. And the staff was extremely knowledgeable, passionate, and they had a very tight-knit community. It's almost like walking into a family. This is not a sponsored post. It was just, I've seen a lot of treatment facilities, and this is just a very eye-opening experience that I wanted to share with you guys. I'll be sure to link to them in the description if you are looking for that sort of thing. Be sure to check them out. So one of the staff that I interviewed his name is Greg. He's a program director, and he's been sober for almost 6 years, and he was willing to come forth and share his subjective experience with addiction and recovery to further educate the general public and to give addicts and their loved ones hope that sobriety is possible. So I hope you guys get some from this. The first question I asked him was, what made methamphetamine so addictive in his experience?
Was I addicted to meth the first time? Yeah, 100%. It's funny you say that because earlier I classified it as heroin being my drug of choice, and it's crazy because obviously I'll have 6 years sober in March, and I don't really get cravings or triggered too much, but they do happen. When they happen for meth. Which is weird. It's a weird distinction because heroin's my drug of choice. It's something that, I would always prefer. But I think the nature of meth and what it does to you, just the way how it turns your thought process into and just the behaviors on methamphetamine, to me, were just so much more addicting than heroin addiction, because the behaviors that are associated with heroin it's a downer. You physically feel good, and therefore it's a physical addiction. But it was a lot of sitting around watching TV and not really doing behaviors were very minimal at that point. Methamphetamine is very behavior based, like it triggers me to want to go out and do these things. I want to interact with people. I want to, I remember just writing crazy amounts in a book and I looked at it later, it didn't make a lot of sense, but at the time I was coming up with these brilliant ideas and I was writing them down, and it makes me want to go interact with members of the opposite sex and try to pick up girls, and plotting all these things. So it was very behavior based, and it was like a rush, so that's what I get triggered for when I do get triggered, is that type of excitement and that type of because at the time you feel like you're just this creative monster, at least when I did it, that I was coming up with these brilliant ideas and I was going to write this movie that was going to it took me to a different level. That never happened when I used heroin. Heroin just numbed me out. Oh yeah, there's nothing like that initial, if you IV it, it's nothing like that initial injection. There's nothing, to this day, there's nothing that is, at least on a substance abuse level, that, yeah, it's just not, so. Yeah, that part. The come down is not so, I guess, glorious. Now that, the come down is, it obviously takes a while, and I mean, I've had come downs that have taken days and you don't sleep, and, you really, sleep deprivation comes with certain things. It comes with, paranoia and it's miserable, obviously depression and stuff like that, and a fiending mentality to get more, really, it's really, that drug is just, it's a scary thing, I remember coming down off of some meth and sleeping for a couple of days straight and not being able to get out of my bed in the morning because, for 3 days straight I was walking. Literally it felt like my shins and my, the top bones on my feet, I couldn't get out of bed, they were that bad, and so it's really, what it does to your body and your mind after is, it's ridiculous. From what I remember, I mean, I definitely, it was just definitely tough, man. I mean, I do remember, being scared of everybody. I remember that. I remember I would lock myself in my room because I was be scared to leave. To the point to where, there was one time where I was, I definitely remember leaving my house. I felt like I was in a movie, and I felt like people were filming me no matter where I went, and it was like a frightening concept. It just definitely. I didn't feel safe around anybody. I ended up getting arrested that night, and being in jail in a state of psychosis was an even scarier process because I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't talk to people. People would just completely, yeah, I was the crazy guy in jail, really. So it was just really a scary, scary instance, man. I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's also, in recovery, you talk about certain thought processes and things that can prevent you from, they can backtrack a craving or a trigger. Like if you have a trigger or a craving, how are you going to get out of it? Like, are you going to play the tape through, or what are you going to do? And that's one of the things that I personally use is like the idea of the surroundings that I'm in, and the people I'm around. And I think I mentioned it earlier. The best way that I can describe it is that I basically was surrounded by people who they initially would size me up by what they could take from me, basically. And that's really just the nature of it. Like if you're with somebody especially in the methamphetamine culture, that's really their ultimate purpose, at least the people that I ended up around, and when you're around that enough, if you're going to survive, you kind of have to assume that same mentality. And if it only takes a couple times for you to find out that these people are really, that's what they're after, and then for them to actually expose you and take stuff from you, or whether it's they get violent towards you, or, they sleep with your girl, or they do whatever, they rob you. I've been surrounded by people who, also, when somebody overdoses, their first thought is to go dump them in a dumpster, that they're not going to call 911, because if they call 911, that means the police come, and that's the last people they want to see. So they're just going to dump you, and then they're going to go on their way. And that's a special type of I view it as just disregard for human life, which you could equate to evilness or whatever you want to. But yeah, those are the type of behaviors you're around, and those are the type of behaviors that I found myself immersed in. And the scary part is at that point when you're around it, you have to ask yourself that question: am I going to assume those same behaviors in order to survive? Because you kind of do, right? Am I going to have to assume those same behaviors in order to survive, or am I going to find a way out of it? So and some people, they don't know how to get out of it, so they naturally start to act the same way, and when you start acting that way, when you start sizing people up for, what can I get from you? And you walk into a place, you walk into somebody's home, and you start to, your first thought is, what can I take from here? What can what is here for me to grab? It's hard to turn that off. So now all of a sudden you're doing that when you walk in your mother's door, and you walk into your sister's place, or your aunt and uncle, your grandparents. Now you're doing that wherever you go. You can't turn that off. That's just, now that's how you operate, and so it's really just a cycle that is just detrimental, Yeah, so this was one of the moments where I definitely this is one of the moments where I realized that I needed to get out of the city I was living in. I was hanging out with some people who were really, I'm not a gangster. Never been a part of a gang, and I've never come from a violent background, but I started obviously being around people that were violent and in parts of gangs, and people who had done long prison times. And I started hanging out with some people who were part of motorcycle gangs. There's one guy who I was getting my stuff from, who was part of Hell's Angels. And I remember I loaned him $30 to get some gas. Something very small like that, and he never paid me back. And it was one of those things where I was hanging out with other people, and they were just rubbing it in my face, hey, you got, this guy, he punked you, he thinks you're nothing, he was just, and obviously you couple that with me getting loaded, we're getting high while we're, I'm hearing these things. And this is a time period where I was heavily into meth, and I normally wouldn't do this, but I went to his house, and I kicked the front door of his house, walked into his house, and his son was sitting on the couch. I remember this. His son, I was lucky he wasn't there. I don't know if this guy had, he carried guns on him, stuff like that, all that type of stuff. I walked into his room. I knew that he had a couple briefcases with tattoo kits and stuff like that. Walked out with two of them, worth to close to $1,000, and walked out the front door, and I went home. And where did I go? I didn't go back home for a couple days after that. I left the tattoo stuff there, and I forget where I went, but got a call from my mom, and there was about 4 or 5 cars outside with Hells Angels lined up in front of my house, and she was freaking out. And like those are the types of behaviors that I was getting into. Like they were out there with a baseball bat ready to break my legs. And like they were messing around, and it was that type of behavior though that was like going to get me in some type of trouble like that, and so yeah, like that's the type of and I'm not from that culture where I'm not a violent person, but I soon found myself with people lined up outside my house with a baseball bat willing to break my legs, and they're asking my mom where I'm at, and now I can't go home. And so things started coming up like, okay, how do I get out of here? And treatment was an option, and I can leave town, and so those types of things, So there was a few turning points. Like it's interesting. Like some people, they do talk about a bottom. Like they hit a bottom, and for me it was more of I feel like I had a series of spiritual awakenings. That really led to me finding recovery. I'll give you an example. Like for one, I grew up in a family where it was like highly Catholic, and so I went the other way. I didn't believe in any type of God or religion, because I saw these religious not to like speak out or say anything against religion, but I had these influences in my life that were religious, and I saw them like my father, for one, who was just not living by good principles, having affairs with against my mom, and then one day just up and leaving, and disappearing, and so, that was what, he told me to be a certain type and then would act a different way. So I had a couple I had one instance where something happened, and it basically showed me that I was not alone, basically. I had this instance where I remember vividly, I was at this guy's house who would supply me drugs, and I was there with a girl that I was dating, and he was like openly, this is like the short end of the story, but he was like openly like trying to hit on my girlfriend like in front of me, like saying things like, oh, if I was your guy, I'd be treating you like this. And so I got really upset. I went for a walk, and I basically made up my mind that when I got back to the apartment, like I was gonna basically square up with them and fight them. And I remember I was walking into the apartment. As I was walking in, I remember the thought I had, I'm gonna teach this guy a lesson. I remember it. And as I opened the door, he was laying on the couch, and everybody was surrounded by him, and he had overdosed on the couch. And it was like, I was like, it took me by surprise. Anyways, long story short, like ambulance was called, he was resuscitated, and I ran into him 2 or 3 weeks later I was at a casino, and I saw him, and he came up to me, and he gave me a hug, and he was a different person. He had 3 weeks clean, and he was like humble, and he was not trying to talk. He wasn't trying to instigate a fight. He was a different person. And it was one of the first moments where I realized that I wasn't teaching any lessons in life, that there was something greater out there that was taking care of that. Because before that, I didn't believe in anything like that. And I realized that I could have done anything to him. I could have fought him. I could have beat him up, but it would have done nothing. It wouldn't have taught any lesson compared to what something greater actually taught him that night. And, just something small like that, it opened up the door for me to believe that there is something more powerful out there than me. And that was the start of me wanting to get clean. I obviously, didn't get clean that day. And there was a couple other instances that caused me to get clean at that point, so, but that was probably the first pivotal moment where I realized I wanted something different, that life wasn't just this like shallow thing where, I try to get whatever I can out of you, and you try to do the same, and whoever has the upper hand wins, because that's how I viewed life a lot of the ways for the majority of my life. And when that happened, I realized that, hey, there's something else out there. So, yeah. So there's a couple of different things that I do. The first thing I do is I try to take care of myself physically. I try to stay active. I do stay plugged into a community of other people who go through the same thing. I do use the 12-step model. I do go to 12-step meetings. That's a good place for me to just meet sober people. For anybody who's not into the 12 steps, they don't buy into it, or they had a bad experience, there's a lot of meetings out there, and there's just a lot of sober people to meet at meetings, and so I stay plugged into that. Being in an environment like this where I'm constantly helping other people, it does a couple things. It gives me a purpose, right? It makes me feel like, it doesn't make me feel, it ties in my addiction, So like the things that cursed me in my life, like the things that were at one point my curse and kept me in my addiction, the depression, the fact that my father left when I was young, like certain trauma, stuff like that. Now it's my blessing, Like what used to haunt me now enables me to help other people who've gone through the same thing. And all it takes is for one time for somebody to come in and say, hey, this happened to me, and I went through the same thing, for me to now realize it's a blessing. It's not a curse anymore. Like I can help somebody through it, And so it helps transition those things into a positive, and I stay connected to something greater than myself. Like, and that through and through is like the strongest thing in my life, because there's a lot of things that can happen in the real world, and a lot of things do. It can be chaotic, people, family members die, people get in car crash. Like you think of the worst imaginable thing that can happen to you, it can happen. But all I have to manage is my relationship with my higher power, and everything's okay, and by doing that, I if I can maintain that relationship with something greater than myself, I don't have to use, right? And if I don't use, then I'm winning no matter what, because I'm not where I used to be. That's something I can manage. I can't manage the entire world. I can't manage what happens to me. I can't manage the bad that's in the world, but I can manage not using. As long as I do that, I'll always be a winner, And so like if I keep it at that level, it's easy for me to stay sober. It's night and day, man. It's like night and day. Not just in, and you think of like when people say like, oh, your life will be so much better, and you'll get a job with money, and you'll get, nicer clothes, a car, all this stuff. You'll even get like good relationships, which are very valuable. But like the things that I notice are much different than that like I appreciate more and more. Like my role models have changed, like what I think it means to like be like, to be a man, or like, who I respect has changed, who I admire has changed, I go to school, and like all of a sudden, like, the people who I took a chemistry class, and like I'm just sitting there amazed at somebody who like discovered the atom, or who the two guys, Critson and Watt, I believe was their name, who discovered the DNA molecule, and like what that did. Like those are my role models now, like the people who have like changed the world in a certain aspect, versus like what it used to be is just something completely different, like I used to think that the guys with like the chains and like, were had all the girls around them and like all that stuff, that was admirable. I wanted to be that. That's like, I see now that's like small time. Like that's like, there's nothing hard about that, like anybody can go buy a car. Like all you need is the money, like, and so like it's just changed, like I value like the creative process, and like the desire to like make a difference in the world, because that's actually admirable, that not everybody can actually do that, and so like, coming from a dark spot like that, and then, having a life that's different now, like I value those types of things, because I have friends that are dead that don't have the gift of life, like they're dead, they're not here, and so like, this, what we're given here is really a gift, and so like I want to try to make it the best that I can, I want to try to learn more, and like, I want to value things that actually matter, like, and that's one of the things that like being in a spot like this where like I help people. What's crazy is that like I noticed that you help people, and more often than not, you don't know that you help them, like you might say something to them and they don't tell you like, hey, what you just said really helped me. You know, like that usually actually rarely doesn't happen. It'll happen like later on when they come back and they have 6 months clean and they'll tell you, hey, what you said really helped me, you know, but that doesn't always happen, you know. And so a lot of it is like you're trying to help and you don't really see results and you're just kind of hoping that you're doing good, you know, that you're helping people out. And I think that like by living a life like that, I think that when I do end up, you know, dying, I think I'll be able to see like an effect that I've had on people that I won't get to know I won't get to know that while I'm alive. You know, that's like a gift that's waiting for me, you know, when I pass over. Like I'll get to see like whose lives I may be affected and didn't even know it, you know? And that's like something that like, that also helps me get out of bed in the morning, dude. You know, that like, dude, there's something after this that all that's gonna matter, you know? There's not a lot of glory in like helping people, you know, there's not. And you shouldn't be doing it even if it is, you know? But like, you know, I'll be able to see that change later, you know?
All right, I hope you guys got something from this video. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and check out renewalhealthgroup.com. I'll put links in the description. Also, if you or a loved one struggling with addiction, feel free to reach out to me on shamelessprotocol.com. I'll link that as well. And I love you guys. Peace out.